According to the axis of evil against evil, the first task of war machines is to perceive war, not as a consequence of collisions between war machines or crisscrossing lines of tactics, but as an autonomous machine spawning war machines in order to hunt them down again. War uses its own weapons against each other. Assyrian military scriptures frequently refer to these weapons and implements of war as in contrast to the military weapons of war machines. Throughout the scriptures, these weapons are alluded to as a fog of war. Strategies and Draco-spiral pathways upon which war machines are gradually but subtly devoured, eaten away by war. In one such scripture, Lamassu is hailed as the first military invention to venerate war as being external to the logic's existence and activities of war machines. According to the Assyrian axis of evil against evil, war spreads over deep cultural agitations, Tellurian dynamics, heretical insurgencies, and outsiders. The truth of war lies beyond the battlefield. Aramaic shibboleth inscribed on the Lamassu discovered at Khorsabad. Bassani notes that for the Assyrians, war hunts war machines rather than war machines hunting each other. War is fueled by terminal fusions of strategy and tactical multiplicities. Everything that emerges from war is a devastating disruption for the configurations, guiding systems, and probe functions of war machines. According to the occultural and military doctrine of evil against evil, war produces too much heat for war machines to bear, to the degree that they begin to gradually melt, tactical meltdown, precipitating a molecular breakdown into diabolical particles. The Assyrians suspected that Mesopotamia was swarming with these diabolical particles, the demonically lingering remnants of war machines. Tactically dead but strategically reanimated and introduced to the battlefield, this molecular debris left behind by melting war machines was frequently referred to as the fog of war. In Assyrian military doctrines, war machines are always incinerated and consumed by war. The process of immolation is gradual and twisted, but the return path to life is abrupt and is never recorded. For war resurrects the disintegrated war machines and brings them back to life from the other side of the battlefield in the form of a Sumerian haze, the fog of war. The Assyrians believed that these particles or necrospores of dead war machines haunted every aspect of Middle Eastern life on behalf of war. These particles were generally understood to be a demonic dust, a cloud of spores or dry spirits, capable of possessing military programs, political systems, and people. Assyrians alluded to them as relics or diabolical things more radically warlike than war machines themselves. It was mainly through the axis of evil against evil as an cultural and political vehicle that the doctrine of autonomous war impregnated Zoroastrianism, the germ cell of Abrahamic monotheism. Later on, the axis was vigorously unfolded through Islam's military omega of jihad, known as Qiyamah, or Islamic apocalypse. In Qiyamah, every war machine must burn, and all modes of military survival, whether belonging to the state or to nomadic insurgencies, must be consumed by the unlife of war. The axis of evil against evil is a politics of endurance in war, but one that resists any form of attunement or economical appropriation by the survival impetus of war machines. For war machines, survival-oriented regulations are not limited to the act of surviving. They also drive war machines to move and to kill. The Axis sought to breed and simulate war machines corresponding to the machinic particles and weapons that war employs to hunt war machines. For this reason, the doctrine of evil against evil developed models of terminal fusion between tactics and strategy, with the aim of attaining autonomy and pragmatic multiplicity delineated by smooth operational cutting edges, cryptogenic emergence, tracelessness, omnipresence, multifunctionality, and the ability to cross incompatible dimensions, traversing new territories to accomplish their tasks. In short, the Assyrian Axis was supposed to engineer war machines corresponding to the unlife of war itself, if only as faint terrestrial echoes of its unlimited ferocity. The Assyrians understood that the tactical knowledge of their war machines must nourish itself on the axis of evil against evil, the paramilitary doctrine which perceives war as being independent of war machines. War has terminal occultural tendencies for hunting war machines of all kinds. The Assyrians realized that in order to protect the state from the inevitable internal insurrections, organizational corruptions, and incursions from the outside, they had to engender war machines conforming to the autonomous tendencies of war. However, according to Parsani, the Assyrians' fatal mistake was to ignore the fact that those war machines which achieve autonomy and are fueled by the fusion of tactics and strategy will eventually turn into disloyal agents or double dealers, trisonomic dissenters. Such war machines gnaw at the roots of the state's foundation on all fronts, corroding it, becoming invisible gates between the state and the unlife of war. The task of the Assyrian paramilitary behemoth was to breed unheard of war machines, capable of roaming freely beyond the borders of the state. Security leaks which do not open the state to its enemies, but to that which knows nothing of territory survival or even nomad war machines. A state protected and secured by such intrinsically elusive war machines no longer answers to Deleuze and Guattari's characterization of the state. Lamassus, also known as the Last Guardians, are always found in pairs at the border of Assyrian palaces, gates, and the entrances leading to the most sacred temples. Lamassus watch what comes in but not what goes out, Viewed from the front, they stand firmly in place. Seen from the side, their winged bodies appear to stride forward on a peculiar complement of 5 legs each, indicating the marching movement of a quadrupedal beast. Lamassu is a desert hunter. It takes flight so as to chase pests descending from the sky. It is a weapon enveloping diverse tactical lines and instruments of battle. Lamassus are capable of crossing over into fundamentally different planes or dimensions all at once. They attack, they defend, hunt, and scheme. Standing still at the gates, they can yet be present everywhere, at the threshold of the outside and at the outer limits of the state. For this reason, Lamassus are usually identified by their transient omnipresence, inside and outside the battlefield. The Babylonians called the Assyrians' bizarre obsession with these creatures Lamassu complex, in an allusion to the belief that war has a life of its own. The following section is a distorted part of the original report, presented by the Delta Force's Special Division Obliteration Unit, possibly derived from Obi, Bai, sorcery, and obliteration. But the first 3 capital letters suggest an acronym, making this interpretation problematic. Obliteration Unit. Obliteration, okay. Obliteration Unit. Cool. The report was made by former infantry Colonel Jackson West. Upon securing the archaeological site of Nippur in Iraq. The archaeological site was covertly secured by conducting a distracting shock and awe operation called Ready for CNN Hajj, carried out by the spectacular black CARC helicopters of the US 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Later, a section of the report was leaked to the public by Jackson West, who had unexpectedly deserted Delta Force. The information leak was later confirmed by a Delta Force security spokesman. This version of the report was presumably rewritten by someone other than West himself, recomposed a number of times to possibly as a result of multiple oral transcriptions. For this reason, the hyperstition team decided to revise and edit the entire text. This report bears a striking resemblance to a short essay written by Dr. Hamid Parsani on a military manuscript discovered in 1986 at Shadupam, located at Tel Harmel, which apparently means place of writing. Along with scripts on mathematics, mesomath, botany, ancient warfare, religion, and various lexicons. In that essay, Parsani offers a detailed discussion of a cryptogenic Assyrian military experiment in occult weaponry, which eventually led to the total eradication of the Assyrian civilization in the summer of 1612 BC. Parsani nominates this a cultural meltdown Assyrian syndrome, possibly an anti-monotheistic, devoid of Yahweh's jealousy and its consequent victimhood and political nomenclature, after Nahum's The Burden of Nineveh. This is a part of the report as edited by the hyperstition team. The most terrible assaults are those carried out by occult particles. They call them demons or agents from the other side, as well as the diabolical undertides of war itself. Lamasus were revered as the most militantly efficient and tenacious guardians against intruders, cultural saboteurs, and violating sorcerous forces in particular. Lamasus are always twosome, and hence more than one but essentially less than the multiplicity of lurking barbarians, desert Tartars, and the Golden Horde. More than one and less than many. Lamasus are always duplicitous in every sense. These numeric behemoths share more with the numerical sorcery of capitalism than one can imagine. Moving toward ambiguous but efficient numbers, twinness and duplicity are spontaneous numeric military units. They effectively combine the fluidity of the many and the military precision of the one. Undoubtedly, Lamasu formulates the principle of dyadic glory. The towering towers of capitalism come in twos. Lamasus undertake a strategic course of action, engineered by terminal fusions of tactics and strategy, to defend the state against the cultural particles and unheard-of enemies. Assyrians believed that the most terrible warriors of their empire were not their human berserkers, but Lamasus. Bound to state militarization on one side, but autonomous on the other, Lamasus operate on behalf of both the state's cultural programs and the cultural entities of the outside. They erode the borders of the state, its horizon and its gates, from those obscure regions between the inner and the outer where blurring of the boundaries proceeds at a drastic rate. The regions occupied by Lamasus harbour such violent conflicts between the cultural entities of the state and the outside that conflictual communication is replaced by contamination. And the climax of victory or defeat is succeeded by the swash-backwash waves of epidemics. These regions gradually turn into zones of overwhelming accultural traffic, full of the potential to erode the state and its neighbouring geopolitical environment. In the presence of occult entities such as Lamasu and other repellents, the state's border is reinvented as a field of vortices, unloading accultural heterogeneities into the state, resulting in corrosion as a result of the difference between internal violent fissions associated with divergent cultural lines tending to propagate in all directions, and the gravitational pull of the state's core, which tends to converge all activities according to itself. To dissemination of insurgent crowds as the consequence of violent internal fissions. Minority engineering leads to minority militarism, critically disturbing the cohesion of territorial functions and the state's programs. Three, inflammation of regions already damaged by the systematic failures inherent to organizations and boundaries. These regions are always either the first territories of the empire to be torn apart, or the first places to be invaded by external forces. Yeah. 4. Rise of parasitical modes of organizational poverty. The state's political programs responsible for reinforcing and integrating the system gradually begin to diverge and deteriorate under the influence of occult political pollution. This political pollution is the result of contamination by cultural tendencies which are external to the original programming and the intention of the state's politics. Eventually, the state's political lines lose any capacity to reinforce the system either economically or politically. Finally, 6. 5. Finally, implosion of the state, usually coinciding with an invasion from the outside, for the forces of the outside are always lying in wait, ready to launch an ambush when borders collapse, or are perforated, lurking, ready to rush in. At the time of the Assyrian cultural meltdown, foreigners flooded down from the mountains and consumed what had already been eaten from the inside. The invincible empire was devoured by outsiders in a matter of days. Assyria will fall by the sword that is not of man. A sword not of mortals will devour them. Isaiah 31:8. Colonel West ends the report with the following sermon. War on terror is riddled with dusty ancient crypts saturated with occult geometries. Our decadent intelligence systems, our artless principles of warfare can never exhume these crypts, from which the other side of the battle digs out its untimely war machines and offbeat tactics. Their war machines do not belong to the time we know, the time in which our civilizations were built. We find ourselves constrained to fight in their time, according to geometries which are utterly alien to us. Our exposure to this alien time carries the risk of chronic side effects, or something even worse, something irrecoverable, and beyond our bloodiest dreams of frenzy, smoke, and ash, which in comparison will come to seem like the harmless daydreams of unsophisticated, naive innocence. Asterisk. On frenzy, smoke, and ash, there was a woman lying on her back next to the truck, a middle-aged woman with a sunburnt skin, eyes gouged out and filled with semen. It was more exquisite than the white eyes of an epileptic. I named her Moby Dick. Jackson West's journal, entry date December 4, 1993. With the fury of my terrible weapons, Tiglath-Pileser I, Assyrian king, circa 1110 BC, from a tablet discovered beneath a gate at the entrance of Sennacherib Palace, guarded by 2 lamassus. The manipulative policies of the state exploit occultism, either as a repressive tool or a substitute for rigorous politics, the occult as a dummy politics, or as a means to repel outsiders, xeno-agents, their principles and influences. But once these political tendencies are undermined and derailed, the occult perforates the body of the state's politics. Which decaying can no longer hold at bay the outsiders and radical xenoparticles, whose functioning is external to the survival of the state. In the wake of this political cataclysm, every program, every manipulative policy mutates into tentacles of communication, spreading deep throughout the untrodden abyss of the outside. The state's occult entities will eventually attain autonomy as a result of such constant communication with xeno-agents. Avatars of the outside awaken the insurgent potentials. Inherent to the state's occult entities. Avatars of the outside awaken the insurgent potentials inherent to the state's occult entities. Correspondingly, the rise of autonomous entities within the state contributes to the emergence of anomalies. The more autonomous processes emerge within the state, the more anomalous the state becomes. If occultism propagates itself only by eating itself, then once the state's politics is contaminated by the autonomous occult, it will too become autophagic by nature. By fatally overexposing themselves to the horizons of the beyond, the state's occultural agents gradually construct bridges and unlock gates between the borders of the state and occult entities of the outside. This panorama of emerging duplicity is anticipated by pulp horror's obsession with the spontaneous disorders caused by occultural guardians, rebel lamassus, and independent scarecrows hunting farmers in desolate lands with a passion. Such narratives of insurgency recall the Catholic obsession with gargoyles. Pulp horror quite rightly detects an ominous tendency of the state towards the employment of hyperstitional and occultural agents. As soon as gargoyles become fully active on an autonomous level, fusing with intrusive outsiders and contaminated by alien particles, they come out of their petrified state. They begin to feast on everything that remains inside, the walls and empty aisles. They melt into pillars, infesting them stone by stone, deeply embedding the architecture of the holy place with their own chemistry.